Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business, politics, and today, the defense industrial base. We're thrilled to partner with JBG Smith today and hosting this event in person in Northern Virginia at National Landings Experience Center here downtown across from the Pentagon. And we're also grateful to the Department of Defense for their cooperation and support in making the event today possible. And we're excited to host Will Quinn, Senior Policy Advisor of the Office of Strategic Capital, for today's conversation. Good to see you, Will.
Great to see you, Ken, and good to see everyone out here.
Well, cheers. Thanks for coming. I hope you're enjoying the coffee.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, you're right down the road here in Crystal City, right?
That's correct. We are right down the road. We have an office in the Pentagon as well, but it's lovely to be here at National Land Day. It's amazing. I had a job here 17 years ago.
It looked just like this, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. I was a little hesitant to come back to Crystal City to work, but it's actually really amazing.
Yeah, it's testament to the ecosystem and to all the folks here today from the industry, from construction, from real estate, a nice broad sector. So as a way to level set, let's dive into this new department. I mean, it started in 2022. What is the Office of Strategic Capital and why should people care or pay attention?
Yeah, so Office of Strategic Capital within Department of Defense, under the Undersecretary of Research and Engineering. I think the easiest way to explain what we do is we're essentially a bank that uses federal credit tools, primarily so loans, to help support the industrial base emerging technologies, to sort of attract and scale private capital using some government capital and really scale the investment in the areas that are really critical to future capabilities of the Department of Defense.
So just to tease that out a little bit, right? Like I think when we were having a prep session, if the Department of Defense wanted to buy a weapon, they could literally just buy it. That's not what this office is, right? This office is really meant to kind of help companies actually grow, create a longer ecosystem, lifespan, et cetera. Talk about the distinctions there.
Yeah, that's right. So I think with our office, probably the origin story is somewhat useful to tell, and I'll just give a capsule version of it. So as we all remember, during sort of the COVID era, we realized that there were all of these critical supply chain vulnerabilities. And that was for commercial products. It was for things that were important in the defense and national security ecosystem. And if you sort of recall, there were shortages of various things, microchips, all
coffee. You couldn't get the beans. It was a crisis.
It was a very challenging moment. And I think one of the insights from that is in this kind of era where we have been so dependent and lost so much capacity in our industrial base, and we have so much innovation that's occurring, but is still dependent upon various inputs and components, that we really need to think more strategically about how we are investing in emerging technologies and in the industrial base. So for us, it's a little bit less about traditional, the government knows how to buy, and DoD, of course, knows how to buy large-scale defense acquisition projects. You know, we're not talking about F-35s. We're talking about everything from the critical minerals that go into the chips, the microelectronics themselves, the sort of advanced materials. There's any number of areas that we could talk about. But we're sort of talking about making that a robust ecosystem for the United States so that, national security is protected long-term and we don't have some of those vulnerabilities.
So I think it's worth spending a little bit of time thinking through what are those categories. If I'm not mistaken, it's upwards of over 30 different sectors, from like rare earth magnets to heat pumps to all kinds of things that actually impact our own broader national security.
Yeah, so our statute, so we're authorized by Congress as an office, and they sort of help set the boundaries of what we can invest in, sort of in partnership with DoD and OMB, which is sort of our regulator in these early phases, and really great relationships with all of those stakeholders. But yeah, so we have 33 covered technology categories. Now, some of them blend into one another. There's a lot in the microelectronic space. We have critical minerals and maritime infrastructure, autonomy, quantum. So it really covers a wide range. Essentially, right, that's to kind of bound our investments, but also give us a lot of latitude in terms of where we can direct the money that we have in the loans that we provide to companies and to investors.
And do you expect that list to grow? I mean, are members of Congress as well as industry kind of giving you ideas of maybe new sectors to add on to?
Yeah, I think that there's always discussion of adding, and I'm a former congressional staffer myself. I used to work on the Armed Services Committee. So one of the things that you often do when you're doing the NDAA is you identify a need and you add something to a pre-existing authority. I could easily see more being added, in statute, whether it's this year or future years. There's a lot of different areas of interest right now that one could cover, whether it's in the energy space or elsewhere.
So talk a little bit about like how much capital you have today to deploy.
Sure.
What is that lending capacity, elasticity, if you will?
Yes. So I think this is in many ways kind of our real kind of value add to the department. So federal credit is this tool that lots of other agencies and departments have used in the past. There's Department of Energy, Export-Import Bank, Development Finance Corporation. DoD has had variations of lending, but nothing that's sort of in this vein of really strategic investments for national security using credit. So to give you a sense of the scale and sort of the model, right? So in fiscal year 24, we had $49.2 million in appropriated funds to go towards our sort of direct lending or our kind of capital assistance program. We could lend up to $984 million. So there's a scaling amount. The idea is that you're doing loans and you're balancing a portfolio that's going to return money to the taxpayer to repay those loans. So the idea is it's very efficient use of taxpayer money and you get this scaling effect. So FY25, we were up to $89 million in appropriated funds. And I believe we ended up at about $4 billion in lending authority. And then obviously that sort of grows and grows. But the idea is small amount of appropriations, big scaling effect in terms of the capital that you can allocate to companies.
And talk about what folks are getting that lending power for today. If I'm not mistaken, it's machinery, facilities. What do people kind of come to you for lending support on, and how may that evolve in the future?
Sure. So that's a great question. Our first product, which we sort of announced to the market at the end of 24 and then opened the window for 30 days of applications and received over 200 in 30 days. A lot of engagement with the market. That was all based around what we called our equipment finance product. So we had companies from various sectors, whether it's space, whether it's microelectronics, whether it's advanced materials. But the loans that we were offering, and this is partially because it's easier to underwrite against and sort of make this stand up relatively fast. It's for equipment and sort of refurbishment, new equipment that goes into these kind of these companies that are doing work in these technology areas. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're sort of standing that up and trying to get loans out the door in our direct lending sort of product line. I think the vision in the future is maybe we're a little bit more moving into project finance, greenfield, and various other types of products. But right now, we're really laser focused on execution of that first product.
And is that window going to open back up for future companies? What's the kind of timeline for engagement?
Yeah, so I can't give you sort of an exact timeline right now. I think that our goal this fall was to have a bunch of agreements sort of finalized with this first tranche, and I think after that the aperture is going to open significantly. But I don't have a precise time frame for you.
So what's unique about this room is we've actually brought a lot of industry partners. You had the opportunity this morning to meet with a few of them one-on-one. What's your message to industry? Are you happy that there was 200 applications? Should there have been 2,000 applications? What's the kind of ask and call to action for industry?
Sure. So, more applications is always great. We have, limited bandwidth as any organization does to review and assess. And I think we're assessing not only on bankability as a bank might, but we're looking at national security impact. We're looking at sort of the relationship to broader market demand, and I can talk a little bit about how we think about those things. But we could really use the insights that you all bring from the market to sort of understand where the biggest deltas are, and I can communicate as well on sort of what we're targeting, what our goals and objectives are, what some of our constraints are. But really having that engagement with the market, talking to people, learning where the gaps and problems are on your side is really important, I think. So really welcome conversations and keeping the dialogue going.
Contrary to popular belief, I do have a day job. I don't just drink coffee. And we have been spending a lot of time traveling the country on behalf of advanced manufacturing companies, right? I think the type that would come to you for support. And I think one of the things that has been an eye-opener is this challenge about speed to market because of just cost of facilities, sourcing the real estate. How much of a concern is there on the department side to actually ensure speed to market for these new companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of balancing a couple of different things here. Speed is obviously incredibly important. There are so many projects that are sort of going on right now that are dependent on large amounts of capital investment and that need to be delivered over
Empower.
Yes, there are all the critical components that go into that as well. I think one of the challenges that we sort of face, right, is we have to make sure we're doing our due diligence, and we're a relatively young organization, so we're learning as we go. But we have to sort of balance that with the need to get these critical capabilities up and running. And many of the companies that we're dealing with, these are companies that, the market as it exists, there are other places to put money from traditional banks and other sources, and we're sort of targeting a different segment of the market, a segment that needs a longer-term loan at a lower interest rate than traditional sources will provide. So all of that is to say, it's complicated, but a lot of these companies, they need kind of capital assistance in the short term, but over a longer duration. And so we're trying to work through that.
Well, I can imagine in the critical mineral space, if you're building a mine, that's a decade-long project. And we've seen this already in the market where that challenge for, like, let's say lithium extraction is now hitting a roadblock with low-cost lithium being flooded to the market by China. So how do you think about the geopolitics and global competition as well as supporting industry, but protecting taxpayer dollars?
Sure. Yeah. So this is an area
where pressure.
No pressure. Well, I'll start with a caveat that starting from a place of humility, a challenge like critical minerals supply chain is really a whole of government approach.
Yeah, fair.
You mentioned mines. Even with permitting, that's a 15-year process as it currently exists to open a new mine. Processing is its own challenge. All of which is to say, we have sort of a role to play in the entire mine to magnet sort of space. I think that we have capital that we are willing to deploy and bring sort of DoD equities to kind of bear in making sure that a market signal is being sent. But that's gonna be a multi-stage process. And if you read the executive order on critical minerals, if you look at sort of the number of entities that are involved, it's a big dialogue, both domestically and internationally in that space. So there's a lot of work to come there. But
what I find so fascinating and worth kind of like doubling down on is the sectors you're investing in, they're not weapons, right? These are really like critical industries for broader national security purposes.
Yeah, that's right. So we sort of have as part of our mandate and our sort of legal authorities, we are sort of bounded, and this will become very evident in a second. We have to focus on things that have a commercial market, not just a sort of defense market.
So that means dual use technology. Like more people understanding what that
means. Yeah. So for instance, this is why it makes sense. You would not want the government to make a loan to a company and have repayment premised on the government then doing a procurement or acquisition contract with the company. It's kind of the self-licking ice cream cone that it just doesn't make any sense for the taxpayer, right? So in that sense, right, there's some boundaries on what federal credit can do. So we're less in the sort of pointy things that go boom. But if you were to talk about everything that goes into, say, the supply chain, whether it's sensor technology, advanced materials, energy, you can sort of microelectronics. These are all things that have broad applications and broad commercial use, but are also really, really important to the Department of Defense and its capabilities. So that's sort of our target area, particularly on our direct lending side. We also have a partnership with the SBA that focuses a little bit more also in sort of dual use, but also more in the startup space and across the life cycle of companies. But sort of direct lending is the kind of bread and butter of the program right now.
I think it's just such a fascinating time because a lot of the companies that we're talking about are relatively young, just like the department. And I think sometimes it's all about timing on these issues as it relates to commercialization, right? And I think there's been this moment where a lot of tech companies and the best and brightest in America were creating apps so we can get coffee delivered to ourselves, and now we're building rockets and drones and hydroflyer gliders and autonomous ships, right? Like, so what is your kind of reaction? What is your effort to kind of really empower, engage with this younger generation that are not the traditional primes that we're all used to, right? There seems to be this new wave of innovation that will hopefully benefit the broader American national security apparatus.
Yeah, so I alluded to sort of our work with the Small Business Administration, the SBI CCT program, which essentially provides leverage to investors. to go out and sort of buy with and through the market, identify companies that are working in these sort of emerging technology spaces. So it's nice that we have partners that are doing some of that work for us and are allocating capital in ways that actually make sense to them. I think in terms of our direct lending side, that equipment finance loan, you really get the full spectrum. You get, folks that are coming out of space, things that were space startups 10 years ago, they're sort of reaching some degree of maturity. You have people that are doing advanced materials, they're coming out of sort of lab environments that have new companies, and you're dealing with established industrial players. So there's a really full spectrum there. And I think you have to have people that understand each segment of that market. And we have some very talented investment professionals working with us in that.
It's one of these things that we see in our day jobs where the innovation may be happening in Princeton and Cambridge and El Segundo and Seattle and Austin. And a lot of those companies have yet to kind of create a DC strategy.
Sure.
I think this is that moment where not only will the Department of Defense and other agencies not only provide loans or grants, but also be customers for innovation. What's your message to the industry to kind of pay closer attention and how to engage with Washington? Do they need lobbyists? Can they call your office?
So certainly we're always open to take calls. And I think the other thing,
coffee
and have coffee naturally. I think
call Will.
And I should say, even just for this this equipment finance engagement, our product, we talked to thousands of phone calls logged by our engagements team who are happy to talk with companies. What I would say is, and I think this is a useful point of clarification. Within DoD, there are a lot of different organizations in the innovation space. We're more sort of finance oriented, but we are interested in innovation and emerging technology. Figuring out sort of where the best spot in the market is, or best part in the sort of federal system to interact, that's really important to understand. And I think the companies can use support in that area. And also we're happy to sort of help think through that. But you have DIU, right? You've got
Defense Innovation.
Yes, defense. Yep, exactly.
Testing. I read.
You have InQtel, right? And you have folks that are operating more explicitly in the startup kind of space. You have kind of a OSC, which is new and certainly interested in innovation, but works with a broader spectrum, I would say. And then you have the SBIR-SITR program for small grants for sort of startup companies. So a lot of different intervention and access points. And sort of understanding that landscape, I think, is a real set of knowledge that I want to see out there more often, both from the department to the market, but also within the market itself.
So let's segue real quick to energy. And I think we see this every time we're out traveling, right? Like when we do a site selection, you want to find people, power in place, like the right ecosystem. But now it's almost like our searches are just power because of the voracious appetite of the data centers, the power demands. How does your office think about, we have a couple companies here that are doing small modular nuclear reactors, fusion companies. How are you thinking about the diversification and investment needed? And if I'm not mistaken, I think China puts in like 40 or 50 billion a year in fusion. The US does like 2 billion or something. Like that delta seems pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
And we're not only do we need power for your needs at the department, but more broadly in communities to support this ecosystem that's growing.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll take a step back and just sort of give you a sense of scale here. And you mentioned China. The government guidance funds that China uses and sort of directs investment. I was talking about our appropriations earlier. 49.2 against 984, right? 89 million. So on and so forth. If you look at we're talking tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars being directed by China into some of these sectors. So in that sense, we're trying to, I won't say we're playing catch up because we have various advantages in the private sector, and the depth and robustness of capital markets are a major strength for the United States. That said, right, the scale is really dramatic, and for some of these things, particularly energy and infrastructure, there's just a vast gulf in the amount of money that's being expended. So for our purposes, nuclear and fusion are not on our list of covered technology categories yet. I can see a world in which that might happen through the Congress, but we'll see what happens in future authorization cycles. We are thinking about energy, though, in that sense, right? There's a lot of space there. Battery technology is also an area that we're very interested in. All of these things that are essential to make companies run and work and make sort of the physical infrastructure of the industrial base, that's of a great deal of interest to us. And it's of a great deal of interest within the sort of world of traditional military acquisitions, but also has broad commercial application. So just something to think about. But yeah, it's definitely an area of focus.
Interesting. So again, not that we're coming from behind, but China has advanced. And I think part of the narrative is for 40 years, we outsourced manufacturing. And that kind of not only allowed China to advance their own workforce to work in these types of factories and create these types of technologies, but create their own innovation.
Sure.
How do we kind of invest probably in our workforce to meet these bubbling demands as we return manufacturing to the United States? I mean, that also seems like a massive gulf.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'll approach the question with a certain degree of humility because workforce development is really important, but not directly in OSC's kind of mission set. That said, I think, you can look in wearing one of my former hats, thinking about sea power and shipbuilding to a certain degree, right? Shipbuilding workforce, building that capacity is really essential. Almost as essential as retooling the machines to have people that can actually operate in this space. So there's a lot of space directly for DoD to play there. A lot of areas with the established sort of shipbuilding industry. I think that just use that as an example. I think that it's a huge challenge that needs to be. The human capital side is as important as the financial capital, I would say.
Maybe talk a little bit more about shipbuilding. I know we have a couple of companies here that are in that sector. I mean, we're not really building a lot of ships in the United States. I think China builds like 1,000 a year or something crazy.
Yes.
But like, how are we going to catch up to that? Because that is also heavy infrastructure, workforce, capital, etc.
Well, it's a major challenge, and I think you can see lots of discussions about this on the Hill and in DoD. Both in terms of the submarine industrial base, but also surface ships and even commercial shipping. I think all of that is incredibly important. So there have been a variety of executive orders, one of which focused on maritime infrastructure, and it's in our sort of mandate to look at that. I think we're wrapping our heads around what that could look like. There are a lot of different ways to kind of go after that problem. So I don't have anything extremely concrete, but I think that's something that's, again, going to be a very broad whole of society effort to get the workforce, to get the machinery sort of retooled, to get access to the supply chains that we put in. And yeah, if you look at it, I mean, China is the big shipbuilder, obviously. South Korea and Japan as well are major players, some European nations. And this is an area where we absolutely need some of that to be back in the United States. So
talk to us a little bit about the benefits of a company engaging with your office, right? So your office is on the lending side, but the entire Department of Defense is a customer of these products. Is there an ancillary benefit of companies kind of partnering with you? Does the broader department buying apparatus understand what you're investing in and supporting? Is there kind of soft benefit that folks should keep in mind?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things to keep in mind here that I think are important to understand. So OSC, relatively young organization, but one of the decisions that was made early on is to create the Strategic Capital Advisory Council, the SCAC. We love our acronyms in the Department of Defense, as you all know. And on that, we have representation from acquisition and sustainment, research and engineering, obviously, and then the service acquisition executives are all represented on this body. And they sort of help, give us a sense of direction and check in and validate some of our requirements, areas of interest, areas of focus. So there's already an immediate benefit, particularly if you're a company that doesn't come from a defense background and is trying to think about commercialization, trying to think about a broad customer base, but no experience working with DoD, to suddenly have OSC convening a group and saying, hey, we're thinking about this set of investments. We want to target these areas. And sort of having that kind of feedback loop, I think, is really important. It also helps build relationships across the department because OSC is kind of a different animal. DoD hasn't done something like this before. So it's a way for us to socialize the way we're thinking about markets and companies, which is slightly different, I think, than the traditional way in which the department has.
So in this room today, we have folks from industry, from policy, but we also have a lot of financial institutions here. Large Wall Street institutions as well as smaller capital partners. How important is it that those folks pay attention to what you're doing? What kind of seal of validation does a a loan or support from your office mean for the private sector? Because your capital can only go so far, right? So you want your capital to be met by Wall Street investment in capital?
Yeah, ideally that's the goal, right? Is that we're attracting and scaling private capital, because the scale of the challenge is such that if you're just doing it through, and part of the thesis of the office is, if you're just trying to do it through direct spending, you'd almost never build out the level and depth that you'd need of all of these different sectors. Personally, I think when I talk to folks from the financial services, whether it's New York or Silicon Valley or elsewhere, I think that there's sort of we always benefit from hearing what the market is thinking, whether it's established large banks, whether it's family offices, whether it's funds. We all have different sort of insights. It's kind of a little bit of the blind man and the elephant at times, and I think we need information and feedback on what we're doing, how we're positioning ourselves in the market. And similarly, we want to highlight the problems and challenges that we're seeing and sort of find partners to go after them, because it is very much a partnership with the private sector at the end of the day.
Let's talk real quick about a call to action. Congress kind of mandates it, creates the legislation, you implement it. Should industry here be reaching out regularly to members of Congress, pushing them? Like, is there not that you're lobbying for your own benefit as a department, but isn't there a need for people to be more vocal about with their members of Congress? And I think about this from the perspective of leverage when you're building a factory, right? Like, a member of Congress is going to be excited if that project is in their district. Should they be pushing those members to kind of further capitalize the office, diversify offerings, whether it's fusion?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll offer a couple of thoughts here.
You worked on the Hill,
Yeah, exactly. So I think from my perspective, right, the first thing is just being aware that the office exists. When I look across the,
well, you've been on Coffee with Ken's, no?
Yeah, exactly. Nation and international recognition.
Everyone loves
coffee. So my thought process on this is as follows. First, being aware that the office exists, and particularly when you're thinking from the perspective, obviously there are members that are aware and have companies that are applying from their districts and are very interested in that. And that's of course natural. But there are also hubs of economic activity across the country. Northern Virginia being one of them. But you could go across and see robust kind of, whether it's startups or established players, being aware that OSC exists, that it has these products, that it can sort of support this ecosystem. It's another tool in the toolbox, and we want companies to be aware of it. We want them to apply, particularly as our capacity grows, to sort of take in and look at more and more applications. So just the awareness and sort of saying, hey, are you aware that OSC exists and that its products are out there? In terms of future offerings, obviously we have our vision of that, but it's very much a dialogue, both with the Hill and with the private sector, being aware of where the need actually is, because this problem is so vast. It's not just whole of government, it's whole almost of society in the sense that there's so many complexities, there's so many gaps, there's so much delta between where we are and where we need to go. That we're not going to have it all with a relatively small team that we have. It can only come through dialogue and engagement. So,
last kind of question. What is the sweet spot of your office from a lending capacity? Individual companies, are they going to be in the $10 million range, 20 million? What are you looking for in terms of what folks want from you for financing?
Yeah, of course. So what I would say right now, just to give you the equipment finance sort of side of things, I believe in our notice of funding availability, the term of art for our application window, we were looking at between 10 and 150 million. But those numbers, may go in either direction on either side of that. And I think particularly as we absorb more appropriations, in the draft reconciliation language, there's a large plus up for OSC. We'll see what happens at that, but there's going to be a much more capacity, I think, for lending and potentially larger projects, potentially smaller projects. We'll see what happens and what goes on there.
Well, Will Quinn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ken.
Pleasure to have coffee.
Thank you, everyone.
Again, special thanks to JBG Smith for hosting us today, for the coffee, the amazing food. Appreciate the support of the Department of Defense and the Office of Strategic Capital, and for all of you being here. If you're tuning in at home, it's coffeewithken.com. Sign up so you can come in person and have real life coffee with people like Will. Until next time, appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.